How's it going, everybody? Welcome to Robert Arms. My name's Rob. I'm the host of this channel. In America, you can own any kind of firearm that you really wanted if you had the legal ability to do so and the financial means. There are some firearms in this world that I think are just so rare and so historically significant that, honestly, they truly belong in museums. I would only expect these firearms to be absolutely nowhere else than the United States Military Academy at West Point in New York. If you're somehow not aware of what the West Point Academy is, it's based in the Hudson Valley just north of New York City. And it's home to some of the most famous generals in the United States military history, dating as far back as the Revolutionary War, when it was founded by George Washington as a base of operations against the British forces in that region. Ever since then, the years after, major wars like the Civil War, where many of the generals that served on both sides have graduated from this school, like Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant, among many others. Many famous generals from World War I and II, like John G. Pershing, General Douglas MacArthur, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and General George S. Patton, to name only a few of the many famous names that have come from this place. So it's a very historically significant school. What makes it very significant to me is that it also happened to have a massive firearm arsenal. And many of these weapons were from foreign nations all over the world. Many of them are also very rare historic prototypes and some of the most valuable war trophies ever captured in history. So with all that being said, I had to see this for myself. And believe me, I was truly impressed. The cool thing about the arsenal is that they have weapons that range from prehistoric times all the way up into the modern day. I think the most interesting pieces of firearm history that they had there were mostly weapons from the 20th century. Now, if you know anything about the 20th century, you know they were rife with war, particularly the World Wars. And starting with World War I, they had a very large selection of artifacts that definitely caught my eye. Many of the artifacts were typical stuff that you would see in your average museum, like bolt-action rifles with the really long bayonets, hand grenades, a variety of automatic rifles and belt-fed machine guns that were used during that era. One cool thing I noticed was their display of body armor that was used during the war, and quite a few of them were experimental, I believe. Some of them were German lobster armor sets, which I've seen before. Some of them were experimental US-made body armor that's very reminiscent of knight's armor. If you ever look at World War I helmets, you'll notice that depending on what country it came from, they're very reminiscent to designs of medieval body armor of that respective country. If you ever did the research on that, it's actually really fascinating. So it kind of comes to show the kind of thought process of the first modern war, how people were trying to come up with ways to protect soldiers from the extreme harsh conditions of trench warfare and the use of artillery, which was very fascinating. And speaking of protecting soldiers, here's this French Adrian helmet this unfortunate French soldier had to wear, which I know was not making any good use of after his extreme injury. Right next to it was some examples of custom handmade melee weapons that would have been used during that era, like trench maces, hand clubs, trench knives, brass knuckles, just very crude melee weapons that would have been brutally used during trench raids in World War I, which was a really cool part of that collection. Leaning on some of the more experimental weapons I saw from that era, there was one that really definitely stood out to me. It was a Springfield 1903 with an optic mounted on it, and the cool thing was that it had a cutaway of a suppressor that was mounted on the muzzle. You don't ever see weapons like that that were ever used in combat in World War I don't think. But it's really cool to see the kind of thought process and direction that they were trying to take suppressors during that time, when most rifles didn't have any kind of threaded barrels, or they didn't have a lot of modularity, which, speaking of experimental technology, they did have quite a variety of early semi-automatic rifles. They had quite a few examples from World War I, like a Mexican Mondragon rifle, along with a RSC 1917 from France. And they had quite a lot of early 1920s prototypes, such as the M1 Garand prototypes I made a video about a while ago, and a few Pedersen rifles, including a Pedersen conversion kit for a Springfield rifle that shot like some pistol caliber cartridge. I forgot what the cartridge was, but it was really cool to see that as well. Now, I would definitely say the coolest part of the early World War I era firearm collection that they had there was the submachine guns. Submachine guns were first used in combat during World War I, and they had 3 examples that definitely caught my eye and my interest. One of them was a German MP-18 that was used in World War I by German stormtroopers to raid trenches with, and they also had an Italian Beretta M1918 Automatico. These 2 weapons were considered the first submachine guns to ever be used in combat, and they were revolutionary at the time when they were first invented. But the third weapon was actually, I think, the most unique, and it was a Thompson prototype made in 1919. I think it was called the Persuader. And this Tommy gun this early Tommy gun, I guess. Never made it to France during World War I. It was made way too late, right at the end of the war, but I would say that if the war were to have continued for another year, I'm sure that weapon would have probably popped up in history books. But we would soon see the Tommy gun 20 years later in World War II, and it would get its reputation from there. They also had some pretty cool pistols from that era, like C93 Borchards, I guess that's what it's called. That one also had a buttstock with it, which was pretty cool, among many other weapons from that time. To the Second World War, they had plenty of examples of your typical standard issue weapons, ranging from all kinds of different countries. They had a Tommy gun that was actually used by General George S. Patton. Funny enough, he didn't also just carry his ivory gripped revolvers. He also had a Thompson submachine gun that he would carry around with himself, which was really awesome to see, along with a lot of personal firearms from famous generals like Dwight D. Eisenhower. They also had some really cool examples of Sturmgewehrs, and one of them was a Walther variant of a early Sturmgewehr from World War II, which was really cool to see. They had a Fallschirmjäger FG-42 automatic rifle chambered in 8mm that they had on display there, which from what I've heard are very valuable weapons to see, and they are very hard to come by, along with your, MG42, which was, it's always awesome to see one of those, I need to shoot one day. They had some pretty cool examples of some early anti-tank weaponry. Obviously in World War I, tanks were invented, so they had to come up with ways to be able to fight tanks, and typically during that time, instead of rockets, which weren't really invented yet for handheld use, they used large caliber anti-tank rifles. They had a original Tankgewehr, and next to that was a boy's anti-tank rifle from World War II. Some examples of anti-tank weaponry were there on the wall. One thing that really stood out to me though was a original Panzerschreck on the wall, and just above that was a prototype M1 bazooka that had Tommy gun pistol grips and a buttstock. So pretty much it was a tube that launched rockets, and it had a Tommy gun gangster grip on it, which I thought was hilarious. It's amazing what kind of research and development these guys were really trying to come up with during the war. Towards the end of the World War II exhibit was, I think, by far the most valuable room, I would say, in the entire arsenal. These were war trophies that I believe were probably the most priceless parts of the collection. The first thing you see when you walk into this room is the original Instrument of Surrender book that was signed by all the Allied leaders and the leaders of Japan during the end of the Second World War on the Mighty Mo. This was a very famous document that pretty much ended World War II right then and there, with all those original signatures, and seeing the original footage combined with like the book itself in front of you is a very surreal thing to see. Next to that, a knife. It was more of like a ceremonial knife. It apparently belonged to Italian dictator Benito Mussolini, and it was kind of a personal heirloom of his, and it was a knife with a Roman centurion on its handle, which I found kind of very ironic, with the idea that his narcissistic personality often displayed himself as if he was a new emperor of Rome during that era, which I thought was really fascinating to see in person. Another weapon that they had in that room was a Smith & Wesson revolver and a baton with iron cross markings on it that belonged to Field Marshal Hermann Goering, who was kind of a large individual. Literally, he was kind of fat. He was a very influential member of the Nazi Party during World War II, and to see his original weapons that he would have carried on his person when he surrendered in 1945, and I believe they have footage of this too, of them taking the weapon off of him. For some reason, he had a very he had eccentric personality. He liked collecting American weapons, particularly revolvers. He liked Smith & Wessons. That's why he carried that one, and he also had a huge art collection, among other things. There's a lot of research that people have done about that guy that you can learn about, but he was a very important individual during World War II, I believe in charge of the Air Force. So that was really cool to see. But by far, the most priceless artifact that I think that they had, firearm-wise, in their arsenal was a gold-plated presentation pistol given to none other than the Führer of Nazi Germany, Adolf Hitler. They've never found his suicide pistols. I believe he carried Walthers. I don't really remember what the manufacturer of this gold-plated pistol was. It was some German manufacturer, and it was presented to Hitler himself. And I believe a USGI took it out of one of his office drawers in either the Bergdorf or whatever governmental building that Hitler would have been using during his time in power. So this was a very, very rare piece of history that will probably never be replicated again, and by far one of the most rarest weapons I've ever seen in my life. So it was by far a very surreal thing to see in person. And of course they had some post-war toys on display that I thought were really interesting to take photos of, like a experimental T-48 US FAL that was used during the test trials for a replacement for the M1 Garand, which I would argue they should have adopted, but they got the M14 instead. And speaking of M14s, they had two of them that I thought were kind of significant to see. One was I believe, an M14E2 with a pistol grip used during the Vietnam War, and another was used by the OSS, which had kind of like a cool tiger stripe camo on it, which was really cool, along with a blooper and a OSS Sten gun that had a suppressor on the end. And they had many other cool weapons like that that I don't remember taking photos of or not. I'll have to go searching for it. But anyway, I just wanted to share that with you guys to make some content for the channel, and I think those were very historically significant weapons that I had the chance to see, luckily. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave a like, comment, interact with the channel as much as possible. I'll take any comment. I don't care if it's an insult at this point. The channel needs to grow somehow. So follow my Instagram at RobertArmsOfficial for any new information regarding the channel. And with that, I hope you guys have a great day and stay safe. I'll see you on the next video.